Today I'm going to talk about the transfer port, which is often simply abbreviated to the letters TP, and its size in relation to fitting a regulator into your PCP air rifle. Now, if you're new to PCP air rifles and you don't know exactly what the transfer port is and what its function is, it's very simple. It is simply a hole or port to transfer the air from the outlet valve when it's knocked open up and into the barrel behind the rear of your airgun pellet. So simply, as the hammer comes forwards and hits the end of the outlet valve stem, it knocks the head off of its seat where it forms a seal. The air rushes round and goes up the transfer port and behind your pellet, firing it out of the barrel. Now, the size of this port is generally gauged by the size of the valve, the spring, the size and weight of the hammer and how far it travels. But in the UK, you'll generally find the transfer port is between 2mm and 3mm in diameter. There is cases where it is of a different size, like in the Carrera 707, which some of you may be familiar with. Originally, if you'd got that, I think in 12 foot-pounds in the United Kingdom, the transfer port was about 1.2mm, and if you got it on your firearm certificate at full power, the transfer port was a meaty 4.8 to 5mm. Now, the size of the hole determines obviously the efficiency of taking the air from the outlet valve up and behind your airgun pellet. And so, no matter how high pressure the air in the chamber is, if the hole is only 0.5 mm, you can only force so much air up it. And so the manufacturers have already gone to some length to work out what size the port needs to be in relation to their outlet valve assembly, spring, the compression, the hammer weight and travel. Now, when you're fitting a regulator into your PCP air rifle, if this port is around 3mm already and you've got a 12 foot-pound air rifle, then generally there shouldn't be any need or necessity to alter it if you're running the regulator at around 90 to 110 bar. So take note of that again. If your transfer port's around 3mm diameter and you're in the United Kingdom and your gun's 12 foot-pounds with a 100 bar, around a 90 to 110 bar, 100 bar setting on the regulator, then this transfer port size should be perfectly okay. Now, if you're going to try and get the most number of shots out of your tank of air, this will require the regulator pressure to be dropped, and some people who go to the absolute extreme will drop this down to as low as 60 bar, but that is an extreme. Normally a low setting would be 70 to 80 bar. They would enlarge the size of this transfer port to a maximum of around 4.3mm. But that is only if the regulator is to be set at a much lower setting. Or if you're in a country where high power air guns are allowed, then this transfer port will also possibly be opened up to a larger size, because once the regulator's fitted, obviously you've not got the whole pressure of the air reservoir pressing against the outlet valve ready to escape. You've lowered the pressure in the outlet valve chamber, and so the port needs to be slightly enlarged. Now, there's a few things you need to take care of when doing this, so as you don't have a nasty accident and spoil your rifle. And I shall try and go through these now in a logical order. So, to start off with, your transfer port is going to pass down into a slightly larger counter bore where the air escapes around into. Now, at this point, where the hole is at its largest diameter and this section here that is at its closest, that wall might be quite narrow, and you need to make sure that you don't enlarge the port to the size where you actually drill through straight into the outlet valve chamber, because that will just wreck your gun. Now, most guns, there's definitely enough meat in here to allow the transfer port to be opened, because most manufacturers export worldwide at different power levels and different calibers of rifle, and so there needs to be enough meat in this section for them to put different size transfer ports in themselves depending on the market which they are supplying. But to make sure there is, I shall show you a simple way what to do, and then you'll have to adapt this for your own particular air rifle. So this is the sort of process which I would recommend, or you should adapt, to see how thick this wall section is. So what you do, here's a prototype Brocock Enigma of mine, and what we'll do here is we'll take a steel rod or dowel. You could also easily use or find out the correct size drill bit to use, and what you do is you put this down the existing transfer port hole. So if I find another rod, so what you've done is you've took your outlet valve out, so you've got to imagine on this picture the valve's not there, and you put a rod or drill that's the correct size down the existing hole. You can then use a caliper. It doesn't have to be electronic or digital, and you don't even have to use a caliper. If you've got a nice clean piece of steel rod or aluminium rod that's nice and clean, then you can very carefully scratch some marks onto that to measure the depths. So with this now, what we do is we'd slide that into the gun until obviously the edge sits against the edge of the rifle and the probe touches a piece of steel rod or drill bit that you've put down the transfer port, and you'd write that measurement down. If you're using just a piece of aluminium or steel rod, then use a knife or scalpel blade and slide it across this surface to put a mark onto the metal rod itself. So what I mean by this is, if you were to get another metal rod, you could put this in until it touches, and then use a knife blade just to mark across the flat end of the air rifle action to put a mark onto the rod. So that's that, and then what you do after that is simply put your measure or whatever back in, and you'd measure to the face that the outlet valve itself sits down on, and then you can take one measurement from the other, and that will give you the thickness of the adjoining wall, so you'll know what the maximum size is that you can go up to. So remember, if you're going, say, from a 2mm hole, transfer port hole, to a 4mm transfer port hole, that's 1mm per side. Obviously it's not 2mm on this side, so you divide the up size in drill size by 2, and then work out whether the wall thickness is thick enough. This wall thickness here needs to be at the thinnest, I would say 1.5mm thick, and that should withstand all the pressure in here and the flow of the air passing around it. So that's the main thing you should do when you're thinking of enlarging the transfer port, is firstly check that it's possible to do that, and this is the simplest way to do it. Simply put a rod down your transfer port. I don't know if you're able to see down there with the camera, but put it down so you can see it goes right the way through, and then measure the depth to the rod, and then measure the depth to the face to which it sits onto. So that's your first thing that you need to do.